And when you talk about hope in action, I can think of no better example and no better person to listen to than Ambassador Andrew Young. And with that,
this is a wonderful evening, and I came here exhausted, and my spirit has been lifted, and I shed a tear when I heard the strings play "It's a Wonderful World." I shed a tear because that's a Louis Armstrong song, and Louis Armstrong grew up in New Orleans, where I grew up. Except that he lived in the worst possible neighborhood in the city. And he was able to see something in that neighborhood and in the people around him that made him, among all of us, write "It's a Wonderful World" and sing it. And it's from people like that I have always received my inspiration and keep my hopes alive. It started for me really as a 18-year-old about to flunk out of college. And a young man came and fell in the swimming pool and almost drowned. When we pulled him out, he realized, I was the lifeguard. When we pulled him out, we realized that he was a drug addict. And we set him on the side, and when he came to, he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "No, where from?" He said, "We were put out of Miss Sarah Vokeland's class in 3rd grade. We were playing with an ice pick in the back of the room, playing mumbly peg." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I do remember." I said, "What happened?" He said, "My mother was working as a domestic worker for $1 a day plus car fare. And they told us to bring our parents back or we couldn't get back in school." He said, "I know you got back, but I never got back." And I was telling him the troubles I was having trying to figure out what to do with my life. And he said, "Look, you don't have any choice." He said, "You've been blessed. If I had had the opportunities that you have, I wouldn't have been in every jail and reform school in the state of Louisiana." He said, "You owe it to me to get something, learn something, figure out how to make the world a better place. Because there are a lot of people like me," and he didn't have to tell me, "that are just as smart as you, and we never had any of the chances that you've had." And he said, "Don't you," and he said, "mess them up," but he didn't say mess. And I realized how blessed I was. And that has to be the beginning of all our hopes. That no matter how bad things are, how difficult our situations might be, there's so many people in this world that are in worse shape that we, as we look at the rest of God's children, we have got to realize that there but for the grace of God go I. And it's not just a black and white thing. I went to New York, had a job at the National Council of Churches, and I was meeting somebody down in Greenwich Village, and we were meeting at Union Square, and I sat there, and a young man came and sat next, old man, well, I don't know what he was, but I was young. I was still in my 20s, and he came and sat next to me, and he said, buddy, can you give me $1 for a drink? And I said, well, I have a wife and 2 children, and we're really struggling, and making $6,000 a year in New York is not something that I can afford to give away dollars. Why do you need a drink? And he said, you don't mind listening? I said, no. I was waiting for some people to gather who were taking me to dinner. And he said, have you ever heard of Choate? I said, yeah. He said, you ever hear of this young senator from Massachusetts by the name of Kennedy? This was 1957, and John Kennedy was just emerging. He said, we were classmates at Choate. I said, huh? He said, and we went to Harvard together, and we partied too much, and I flunked out. His parents kind of kept him in. And I said, well, what have you been doing? He said, I couldn't go home. And he was an educated bum on Skid Row because he didn't feel the capacity for forgiveness in his parents. And I thought to myself, I could have flunked out of 6 schools. My parents never would have given up on me. And then I began to realize how unusual it is to have a Judeo-Christian upbringing with a sense of responsible family life, and things that we take for granted and even complain about when times get tough are the things that really make us the hope of the world. And so when we're celebrating hope, we're celebrating ourselves. That's not always easy. I'm going to tell on a friend of mine because he's found a way to deal with the possibilities of despair and difficult business times. And he goes away to silent retreats. And I've been trying to go with him. I would love the challenge of a weekend of prayer, not talking to anybody but listening to God from Thursday to Sunday night. And I can't get away and do it. So I'm calling on Greg Barranco to pray for all of us in his time of prayer. And I would suggest that all of us need to think in terms of plugging into the Spirit, because that is the source of our hope. Now, I got plenty of illustrations. I woke up this morning and got a call at 9 o'clock, and I didn't get back from Washington until late last night, and figured I'd sleep in this morning. And Mark Winnie called from WSB. And I said, good God, it's Saturday morning. Something really awful must have happened. And before I got to the phone, he said, look, I'm sorry to call you, but there's a young lady out here that has a charity called Caring for Others. And I was supposed to find a way to invite you down there, and she's giving away 40,000 pairs of new shoes to people in Southeast Atlanta. And I was supposed to get you and Evander Holyfield to come down and celebrate, and I'm just now catching up with you. But he said, I can have a car there for you in an hour, and we'll get you out of there at 12. I went. And I met a young lady who came to Atlanta some years ago from Guyana. And she remembered meeting me when I was ambassador to the United Nations. And she said she made it to Atlanta in part because of that, and she figured this was a good place. And she got here with $68 in her pocket. And now she's got a charity called Caring for Others that seemed to be one of the best organized facilities I've seen. It looked as good as this room, but it was filled with new clothes, new shoes. And she'd partnered with a group of fashion designers called Fashion Delivers. And they were going to the stores that they modeled for and the companies that they designed for, and they were getting the surplus new clothes and making them available. And you go in there, and it looks like a little department store. Everything is new, little children's stuff, old people's stuff, everything, but everything is new. And all people in Southeast Atlanta can come in there and get what they need. And I said, good gracious alive. And we probably had a long line around the block, and Evander did show up. And there were all these shoes. And I said, gosh, isn't this a wonderful world? Now, I should be used to that by now, but I'm not. Because I went to lunch, and one day, I went to lunch with the chief of staff for the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And he came to see me about the wars between the Congo and Rwanda and you ought to know about it because it's probably one of the worst tragedies going on anywhere on the planet. But I said to him, look, apropos your story, I don't want to get involved in that war. And I didn't tell him, but I thought what Martin Luther King said, which was very similar to your floating down the river story. He said, I admire the Good Samaritan, but I don't want to be one. He said, I don't want to spend my life picking up people by the side of the road after they've been beaten up and robbed. I want to find a way to change the Jericho Road. And so that's sort of the way I approach hope. And, you know, we've been more successful at it than we give ourselves credit. We get so depressed looking at the bad news, and we say, if it bleeds, it leads. And so you can get really depressed turning on your television set, and all you see is revenge and scandal and Grey's Anatomy and crime scene and person of interest. And I mean, it's all sick. And it's a wonder we're not sicker than we are. But that is not the whole story of the world in which we live in. And I've been fortunate enough to be on the upside of the mountain almost all my life, as you say. You know, when I started with Martin Luther King, we didn't think there was a snowball's chance in hell of changing Birmingham, Alabama. But when 60 homes got bombed and nobody was arrested, when a young man on a bicycle was just castrated for fun and nothing happened, when one of the members of Fred Shuttlesworth's church was pistol whipped in the city hall because he was a little overjoyed after getting a marriage license with his supposed-to-be new bride, he brushed shoulders with a policeman who proceeded to take out his pistol and pistol whip him to the ground. And Fred Shuttlesworth said, look, I can't take it anymore. You all have to come help me no matter what happens. We got to change Birmingham. I can't live there like that. And Martin, if you don't come, we going on anyway. And all we could see was people getting angry and frustrated, and Martin King felt that he really needed to go to try to keep whatever happened nonviolent. And so we went. And we did our usual marchings and boycotts, and everything was doing well, except that in 3 months, nothing had changed. And so even the black leaders came to him and said, look, Birmingham is just too tough. You can't change it. Nonviolence will not work here. And he said, you're probably right, but let me think about it. And he went in the next room, and when he came back, he had on his overalls. And he said, I just can't do anything else but go to jail with the people that I've encouraged to go to jail. And everybody left there despondent. These were good people who had put up the mortgages on their houses to guarantee the bail bonds of the hundreds of people who were in jail. And they had no more mortgage value on their homes. And so they were afraid that they would be foreclosed on in retaliation. And so it was really bad. But Martin Luther King went to jail. After he got locked up, they turned the dogs and the fire hoses on us. And that really wasn't so bad. It was a hot day. And the dogs didn't bite anybody really, and you stayed cool and got behind a tree, you didn't get hurt. But it rallied the whole city. And so that weekend, there was a letter condemning Martin Luther King in the Birmingham Post-Herald, a whole-page ad. And he got worked up. And he had no paper, so around the margins of the New York Times that someone had slipped in, he started writing. No library, no dictionary, no books, no Bible, just the New York Times, and thank goodness, the tough, thick toilet paper in the Birmingham jail. And what came out was the letter from the Birmingham jail. And when that hit the news around the world, and for the first time in a dramatic and erudite way, he explained segregation in moral and spiritual terms. And the world took notice. And it wasn't long before President Kennedy was introducing civil rights legislation to end that. But even before that, 100 businessmen came together in Birmingham and decided Birmingham couldn't go on segregated. And so they agreed to violate the law of George Wallace because it was bad for business to have racial turmoil. And so they desegregated when it was against the law. And you talk about a miracle. And it worked. And we never had an incident after that, until after the March on Washington, when they bombed the church in retaliation and 4 innocent little girls had to give their lives up. But as Christians, we take resurrection seriously. And though sad we may be, we know that God is still on the throne. And it wasn't much longer before I was in St. Joseph's Hospital, when it was down there where the Marriott Marquis is. And Martin Luther King was in there for a checkup. And he got the word that he had received a Nobel Prize. And the first person to come in to see him was Archbishop Hallinan. And I saw another miracle. I saw the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Atlanta standing over a Baptist preacher named Martin Luther. And I was off in the corner of the room giving them privacy time, but I heard the Archbishop say, "May I give you my blessing?" And he proceeded to do what you bishops do. But then he did something I'd never believed possible. He got down on his knees beside the bed and said to a black Baptist preacher, "May I receive yours?" And it was like the Reformation never happened. It was like something had unified us in this city that was bigger than 500,000 years of church history. And that's continued. And that's where my hope lies. Now, the people who came to visit me from the Congo wanted me to talk about the tragedy of the war, and I said, no, let's don't do that. Let's talk about the economic potential of the Congo. And I said, if you get people interested and create jobs, people will stop fighting. And I said, look, 7 of the 10 fastest growing countries on the planet are in Africa. Now, we never hear that. We hear about the famine, we hear about the war, we hear about the disease. But Forbes magazine, which is no liberal bastion, listed these countries and projected that by 2025, if the growth rates of these 7 countries continue at the same rate, and they're growing faster than China or India or Europe, that the largest middle class on the planet by 2025 could be on the African continent. And you'd have more of a market in Africa than you have in China or in India or in Europe. Now, that is mind-blowing to me. But he said, you know, we want to come to Atlanta because we want to learn how you get business and government working together. And we just happened to have a financial summit on the 14th and 15th of November after the election, and it doesn't matter who wins. We're going to find a way to bring business and government together. And we invited him to come. And I said, you know, he was impressed with our airport. I said, the airport in Atlanta is really what has to happen in the world. I said, Maynard Jackson and a young fellow by the name of Bill Hayden worked together. Bill Hayden was from Wall Street, Maynard was a lawyer, and they worked with the business community, and we kind of conceptualized this airport. And we decided we didn't have the money to build it. And we figured we didn't need the money. If we got everybody on the tombstone, and Atlanta was at the bottom, nobody could make any money until Delta, Eastern, United, Marriott, everybody else had to pay before they could make any money, and everybody had to sign on this debt. And so we borrowed about $300 million of tax-exempt municipal bonds. When I became mayor another year later, we borrowed $300 more million. And those bonds continued to pay off, and we continue to have a AAA rating. Sometimes it drops to AA, depending on the airline strikes and the like. But that airport now, it may have cost us $10 billion, it may have cost us $15 billion. Nobody cares, because it generates $53.8 billion in revenue every year, and it employs 434,000 people. And it's a classic coming together of democracy and free enterprise, generating wealth. And I always view things as a preacher. And I want to know, I don't care who the money is, or whether it's Wall Street or Catholic Church or the Baptist Church or whatever, does it feed the hungry? Does it clothe the naked? Does it heal the sick? Does it set at liberty those who are oppressed? Because that's what Jesus is going to ask in the judgment. And so that's the only question that I'm interested in. And the answer is, if you conceptualize projects right, so that everybody participates in their growth and development, there's enough money on the planet, there's enough technology on the planet. All we need is the humanity and the holiness and the vision to bring it all together. The Lord works in mysterious ways. I found another little thing, that there's $21 trillion in tax havens. At first you want to get mad until you realize it's not all from the United States. It's people who've made money in Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Kuwait, Venezuela, people who made money but who are afraid to reinvest it in their own countries. And so they put it in hiding, not just not to pay taxes on it, but to keep it safe. Now, when I became mayor, that was my hope, because I knew there was about $400 billion of what we then call petrodollars. And they were not only hiding it in Switzerland, the Swiss banks were making them pay interest to keep it. And so all I had to do was figure out a way to get a few businessmen to go with me to the places where they had all this wealth and didn't know what to do with it, and say, bring it to Atlanta. You can invest it and make a profit. We guarantee you that we're honest and we're efficient and we're inclusive, we're fair. We're going to include everything and everybody. And when you get ready to sell out and take your profits out, we're not going to question that. And we brought in $70 billion. And we created 1 million new jobs. And that airport and the convention industry, and to talk about, I was in a meeting with the mayor and another group of businessmen last week, and we were celebrating because we finally got beyond 5 million visitors per year with the convention industry. We brought it up to 7 million when I was mayor. And it started out at 2 million, so I thought we were doing pretty good. Remember, none of these hotels used to exist. Now, the city of Atlanta brings 37 million convention visitors every year. And I used to figure back then, everybody that comes here first class is going to spend $1,000 a day. If they come coach, they're going to spend $250 to $300 a day. That's not a bad haul. I'm saying that we, because we have learned to live together as brothers, we are not going to perish together as fools. We're going to work together as brothers and sisters, and we're going to feed the hungry without taxes. This is a tax exemption. Can you think of what it would mean if we could offer the world the concept of the tax-exempt municipal bond and have the World Bank and the IMF and everybody else guarantee it? We have learned, God has blessed us with opportunities and vision here, that if we keep on being faithful, there's nothing that we can't achieve. We used to say that we don't know what we're doing, but we know someone who knows what they're doing. And we don't know what the future may hold, but we know who holds the future. And as long as we place our hope in God and in the spiritual realities of this existence that we share, the impossible, the difficult, we'll do immediately. The impossible will just take us a little time. God bless you.